So welcome to this Centre for Religion in Society webinar on religion and violence against women and girls. Welcome to our two speakers. So Dr. Elisabet le Roux. Elisabet is Research Director of the Unit for Religion and Development Research at Stellenbosch University. She tells me it's spring there and it's very nice at the moment. Elisabet is a faith and development expert with a particular focus on gender-based violence. Welcome. And you will now hear me refer to her as Lisa. So don't think I've got the wrong person. And then welcome to Dr. Sandra Pertak. Sandra is an ESRC postdoctoral fellow at the University of Birmingham in the UK and gender specialist in humanitarian development and migration settings. Sandra has over a decade's experience in international development. So I'm Professor Pauline Collentine, Professor Emeritus here at York St John University in Theology and Religious Studies, and I'm going to be facilitating this discussion this afternoon. So this event is going to be discussing issues with Lisa and Sandra about their research, and also the research that they presented in a book at the end of last year, which was published by Routledge. The book is on the significance of religion in violence against women and girls, and it is part of the Routledge series, which three of us started, myself, Christine Schlitzer at Zurich University, and Aisha Kadifa-Oriana at Georgetown University in the States. And the Routledge series is Religion Matters on the Significance of Religion in Global Issues. And currently today, in the last 3 years, 6 books have been published in that series. The book which Sandra and Lisa have written is open access. So if you Google this on the internet, you'll be taken to the Routledge site, and you can read the whole thing free of charge. If you prefer to order a book, that would be very good as well. So first of all, we're going to talk about this topic, and Sandra and Lisa, first of all, tell me, why did you want to write this book and what motivated you to do it? Now, who's going to go first? Lisa, Sandra?
Okay, Sandra, maybe let me go first this one, and then you can go first with the next one. Pauline, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us and for giving us the opportunity to talk a bit more about our research and this book. So why did we write the book? I think for me, for a little bit over 15 years, I've been working within the international development space, conducting research on gender-based violence with and for government institutions and development networks and NGOs and FBOs and women's organizations. And so much of the research that I've been doing has been about this intersection between violence against women and girls and religion, which is, of course, also interwoven with culture. And I mean, it's been in different countries and with different focus areas like child marriage or FGMC or conflict-related sexual violence. And it's been with different religious groups and very rich and varied. But over the years, you really do see key issues and themes emerging despite these differences in context. So I guess for me, that's why I wanted to write the book. I feel that very often we as researchers, but also as practitioners, we kind of reinvent the wheel. But if we just listen and learn from each other a bit more, I think we can really progress and learn much faster around what works and what doesn't work to end violence against women and girls. If you read the book and the research that I'm relying on in the book, I do so much of my research with practitioner and with practitioner organizations that work at grassroots level. So that I think was for me very important, that we need to be learning from practitioners, not just from academics and researchers. Even though I am a researcher, I'm based in a university. I really think this is important. So the book was for me an opportunity to really showcase the learning from practitioner spaces. And then maybe a last point, I think that was a big motivation for me, is that I think there's often a fear of engaging with religion. For so many people, it's so loaded or contested or sensitive. But I truly believe that in the majority of the world, we can't address the core drivers of violence against women and girls if we're not willing to also engage with religion. And this doesn't mean that we're blaming religion as the core driver of violence against women and girls, but it does recognize that religion plays a role in many of the core drivers, but also plays a key role in addressing these drivers and the negative consequences. So in that kind of way, I'm hoping that our book can help demystify religion, so that with this better understanding of religion, there's an ability to better engage holistically with what drives violence against women and girls and what helps counter it. But Sandra might have totally different motivations, so let's hear from her.
Hey, Sandra.
Thanks. Thanks, Lisa and Pauline. Well, very similar reasons. Exactly this echoes in my experience. I have been in the field on, well, at the global level, coordinating global gender justice policies of some humanitarian agencies. And I always was curious, what do women really think? I never had the capacity to do much research until my PhD on the subject. They were always very quick studies, assessments. So I decided to do my PhD on this topic, on religion and violence against women in forced migration settings. And the reason for it, I think, is to help operationalize the understanding of religion, so we can apply this understanding into development of proper, adequate policies and programs. And as one of my colleagues suggested, I think everything that started in my experience started from curiosity and observing religious bias around me. And often, well, this religious bias manifested in many of the humanitarian stakeholders. Well, that was 87 years ago. I have came across people who somehow blamed religion for violence against women. So I really wanted to know what women really think about it. Would they agree? What is the lived experience of religion? And in my practitioner role, at that time in development and humanitarian sector, I saw the disconnect between the sector and the survivors' experiences, well, during different fieldwork assignments. And throughout my postdoctoral research and PhD in the last 5.5 years, I heard stories of survivors from different regions, from Africa, Middle East, and lately Ukraine. I interviewed over 50 survivors and read over 200 transcripts in other projects of survivors. And I was very surprised that the pattern comes out quite commonly across different settings. The women refer to religion, even if they are not explicitly asked about it. Sometimes we did ask them explicitly, but in other studies, they were not asked. And they would still speak about religion as an important component, element of their experience. And especially when everything else failed them in either forced migration settings, during displacement, or in conflict settings, religion, faith, their personal faith was the only thing that kept them going. So I wanted to write this book to put survivors' voices forward in a balanced account, so we can move forward our efforts, professional, academic research efforts to integrate religious considerations into research policy and practice. And we know, or still, religion plays an important role across global population, or among the survivors and perpetrators. Many of those people are obviously members of faith communities, and we are too. So I thought we need to put a limelight on religion in violence against women and girls, so we can address this problem more effectively, heal the world, and decrease violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, as well. So just to observe a couple of points there, I think both of you demonstrate very much so this important, very much needed encounter and dialogue between academics, policymakers, and practitioners. And we know your book has been applauded in different circles since it was published for doing this. And also, of course, it reflects the aim, the overall central aim of the Routledge series that we have, which is actually to bridge that gap between academics, policymakers, and practitioners, and also teams of authors up to 4 who write these books are often a combination of academic, policymaker, practitioner, those types of teams working on different topics. So one observation there, very important what you say about also getting the message over that you can't ignore religion in our world, and that people themselves, even though they're not always specifically religious or identify with a religion, seem to also reflect back on what religion is doing on particular issues. So thank you for those insights there. So the second question, and perhaps Sandra, we'll start with you this time then. In a nutshell, why is religion relevant to violence against women and girls?
Thank you. That's a huge question. So we all know that the root cause of violence against women and girls is gender inequality. I think this is the common understanding. And gender inequality is caused by multiple factors. On the social level, these are social norms, human behaviors that shape this inequalities, right? And religion, faith, religious beliefs, practices, and experiences do shape people's attitudes and behaviors. So therefore, it is so relevant for us to investigate how can we work with religion to end violence against women and girls. But there's a little tweak to it, because religion doesn't have an agency. It doesn't do anything on its own. These are people who enact religion in whatever way, embody, there are different understandings of religion and so on. So across different studies, what we found is that religion plays as a protective and risk factor. It can be contributing to violence, as we share in our book, section 2, I believe, and then how it can counter. And then we look in section 3, how religion can counter violence against women. There are 2 sides to it. It is a double-sided, dilemma, yeah, I guess, phenomenon. And in terms of protective factors, religion comes across as a massive resilience resource. Women, especially, those that I met in forces placement settings, have been talking intensively referring to their religious beliefs. They talked about religious coping mechanisms and the healing experiences, faith healing. So they would use religion for meaning making, for keeping calm, to empower themselves, to really survive unspeakable hardships. And in terms of risks, as religion as a risk, the understanding of religion and how people enact it, because of all different factors that shape the way people enact religion, manifests itself in all different cultural, patriarchal interpretations and religious discrimination and persecution. We also see spiritual violence when people use spirituality to control and harass and harm, demean and exploit individuals. Religion also intersects with conflict-related sexual violence. Women who are of certain ethno-religious identities are targeted. There are also certain harmful practices which might be justified by community-based cultural or religious interpretations, and some people might be linking certain religious beliefs with harmful practices, and there are many counter arguments and lots of work done in different settings to delink certain, such as early marriage or forced or female genital mutilation, from religious beliefs. And there's also state violence, which can be politicized and misused, and might misuse religion, constructs of religion, to oppress women. So there are different geopolitical and religious dynamics that influence how violence against women and girls takes shape in different settings, unfortunately. And therefore we need to work, this is so relevant in a nutshell, to work with religion to deconstruct it. So if I may have another minute, I will just give you a few examples. So religion as a risk factor can be used by perpetrators to justify harmful behaviors. And this is what I write in chapter, I think, if I remember correctly, chapter 4. Yeah, it was a little while ago. Or the the chapter on how religion contributes as an intersecting risk to violence against women. But
Sandra,
on the other hand,
can I just also say, could you just clarify, you know, the geographical context in the religion which you looked at for your
yeah, sure. So
yeah.
the sample, this is a very good clarification point. My research took place in Turkey and Tunisia and in Ethiopia, but the women that I interviewed in Turkey and Tunisia were coming from 15 different nationalities, because they were women displaced by war, conflicts, and disasters and other emergencies. So this book is drawing on the sample on voices of women from Syria, Iraq, many African countries, and Ethiopia. Yeah, the Somali displaced people in Ethiopia. Thank you. So on one hand, it is a risk. It can be misused to justify harmful behaviors by perpetrators, but on the other hand, it can enable resilience and coping. Women use prayers to keep going and find meaning, as I expressed earlier. Then religion can be sadly used to stigmatize and shame victims, like dishonoring family, for example, for sexual relations outside of marriage or rape. But on the other hand, it can be a source of empowerment, even for rape survivors, to recover their dignity, or to find strength to, well, either in forced migration journey, very often women refer to survival skills, to swim throughout the seas, to pass the deserts in incredible heat. And final example, religion can be understood to encourage passive behaviors, for example, to injure abuse, to protect family name, or survivors may blame themselves. But on the other hand, religion can motivate perpetrators to change their behaviors as well, and by drawing on the prophetic examples, for example. And it can be used to condemn violence against women and stand up for gender injustice based on religious egalitarian teachings. So I'll end here because Lisa has much more to say, and I look forward to hearing it here.
Thank you, Sandra. Lisa.
Thanks, Sandra. Maybe I should clarify. So with the research that I relied on was from various countries across the world over the last 10 to 15 years, but with quite a specific focus on research conducted in various sub-Saharan African countries. But it kind of depends on, with each chapter, I say, which main studies I relied on. But to this idea of, in a nutshell, why religion is relevant to violence against women and girls, I mean, I concur with so much of what Sandra's been saying. I think the challenge of putting things in a nutshell is that it makes everything seem so simple and easy. Whereas I think how religion is relevant to violence against women and girls is quite complex, specifically when it comes to addressing violence against women and girls and its consequences. But I shall give it a go in 3 minutes or less. Again, and Sandra did it in the same way, and this is the logic that we follow in the book. You know, on the one hand, religion is relevant to violence against women and girls because it drives violence against women and girls and its consequences. On the other hand, it's irrelevant to violence against women and girls because religion counters violence against women and girls and its negative consequences. So it's that tension that you kind of constantly have to hold of the good and the bad. But again, that tension, both those sides emphasize that if you're serious about wanting to address violence against women and girls, you need to take religion into account. It's not like a magic bullet or silver bullet or whatever that saying is. It's not the only driver. It's not the only thing, but it's a component of this complexity of violence. If we think about how religion is relevant to violence against women and girls, in terms of driving it, key issues that stand out for me and which we discuss in our book, is that we can see with both the religions that we engage in the book, Christianity and Islam, they're influenced by patriarchy and this can contribute to violence against women and girls. So that gender norms that are a root cause of gendered violence are often maintained and mediated by religious ideas. So in that way, transforming gender norms will require engaging with religion, and engaging with religion is part of confronting and deconstructing these conditions that lead to violence against women and girls. We also see that at the moment, male-dominated interpretations of sacred texts continue to dominate mainstream understanding in these religious communities. We see it in Christianity and in Islam. So we need to, at the same time, go beyond simply blaming patriarchy to developing approaches that deconstruct and really address and focus in on these patriarchal influences in religion. Third, and I think we discussed this in our last two chapters, I'm also a bit unsure about the chapter numbers now. We also see that religious beliefs can hinder or impede our engagement with sensitive topics and taboos that are related to violence against women and girls in religious communities. So, for example, the sex taboo in Christianity, that we cannot talk about sex. It illustrates how these hegemonic views within churches dominate and dictate how sex is perceived, vilifying sexuality, and establishing men as in control and encouraging wifely submission. Maybe to just go to the flip side, the positive role, how religion contributes to countering violence against women and girls. We discuss in the chapter really this idea of the potential of sacred scripture to resisting violence against women and girls, with both Christianity and Islam having a central sacred text and this rich narrative tradition with much authority that can be leveraged for prevention and response in different ways. So sacred scripture empower women, empower survivors. So reading sacred text as an act of empowerment and claiming that right to read and interpret. And it can also be a meeting point for interfaith collaboration, as we again discuss in our book. We also see the important role of religious actors in communities as implementers and partners in interventions that aim to address violence against women and girls. And we need these religious leaders because they have the knowledge and the authority and the position to engage sacred scripture, to reinterpret it, to engage and guide people of faith. So there's really that role and authority and influence is really valuable, a very valuable resource and avenue for addressing violence against women and girls. And especially, maybe just the last point, especially in Sandra's chapters on the coping of survivors, I think the role of religion in coping is very often ignored or not really given the attention that it should, because it's kind of seen as, or just dismissed as this idea of, it deprives women of agency. Don't just say it's religion, the woman did it, But the book, and especially Sandra's chapters, really illustrate the importance of religious coping as an act of agency by survivors and by women at risk of violence. And the use of religious resources like prayer and fasting and scripture reading is a way that they actively seek to change their circumstances. But I shall stop there because that was really more than 3 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. And perhaps just some brief observations of my own. I remember when I read through the draft manuscript, as all good series editors do, before it went for publication, that all three of us as series editors were so immensely impressed with the way in which you'd blended both the theological, different theories that you used to discuss the different concepts of violence and those types of things, and also the very practical examples and stories, the stories of people that you met, which are so powerful in communicating the realities of what you're talking about. And I think so much of what you've now said, and in your book at the time, I remember reflecting on saying, yes, I can identify and see so much of what you're saying in my own Jewish tradition, in the way that Judaism has that negative positive response or teachings about women, and how that is still played out within Jewish communities across the world. So thank you for that. So the next question, Lisa, I'm going to come back to you again, so you haven't had much of a rest of you. So you've worked and done research in many different parts of the world and around this intersection between religion and violence against women and girls. If you had to capture themes across all these very different settings, what is the one learning or takeaway that you would want policymakers to understand?
So I think the key thing for me, and I think that comes across in what Sandra and I have been saying the whole time, but also in the book, is recognize both sides, both the good and the bad, both sides of the coin. So over the top religious advocacy is not the answer. Just saying, oh, religion will fix everything. That's not where we want to go. But totally sidelining on religion and saying it's not part of the violence conversation, that doesn't make sense either. You need to respect context in which you're working, in which you're funding, in which you're, designing policies for. So I think a key thing for me would be to recognize that nuance and how it plays out in different contexts. So, kind of maybe just saying a bit more about this, religion and religious actors, they really do carry great potential and resources for contributing to the prevention and the response to violence against women and girls. And this is due to the various religious resources that are, I think, uniquely connected to religion. So there is a unique angle there. But for this potential to be leveraged and to form part of holistic efforts to address violence against women and girls, I think the international development community has to be open to recognizing and acknowledging the extensive resources that religion has and its unique contribution. And again, and if you read the book, what I referred to now will make more sense, but especially in terms of religious experiences. So prayer, fasting, dreams, healing experiences, there's often a hesitancy to recognize the impact that has on people's lives and on women's lives. And there's kind of a willful ignoring of the lived realities of many survivors. And I've really seen this in my research with survivors. So I think a key prerequisite for fully engaging the religious resources that there are for the prevention and response to violence against women and girls is to recognize these as potential assets. And I really think in our policy spaces and with policymakers, we're fine with working with religious actors in food security, they can help distribute the food. But the moment they start talking about a vision they received from God that told them to go and help that community, then we're super uncomfortable with that. And I think we need to get more comfortable with that discomfort and to really be able to recognize the religious resources and what they offer. They're not esoteric, they're not unreal, they're not imagined. Especially the lives of survivors have illustrated, have shown us how critically important they are as resources for women and especially with mental health and psychosocial support. Yes, so maybe I'll stop there. But that's something that I would really want policymakers to be paying more attention to. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lisa. And Sandra, and this is really our last question in the discussion, and then I'd like to open it up to our people who are attending participants. If you have any question and answers, please start putting those in that question and answer box. So Sandra, taking stock of the book and your practical experience as a gender and social development practitioner, what do you think is a way forward for religious engagement with violence against women and girls in humanitarian and development practice? And what should practitioners be taking into account?
Thank you. I love the question. So this is where we start talking about capacity building and raising awareness about why religion matters in violence against women and girls first. We need to perhaps encourage practitioners to develop some further faith literacy across different world religions. So it is easier for people to work with it. Basically, if we don't know about something, we will never be able to interact with it. And we just need to develop basic capacities, and I think everyone is able to do that, and humanitarian agencies should just integrate it within the ongoing training curriculums. So practitioners would be able to navigate through religious complexities in violence against women and girls programming. And here I would like to invite you to also look at something that I have recently developed based on the book and based on my postdoctoral fellowship. I developed some guidelines notes for faith-sensitive prevention of violence against women and girls. This is still under review, and if you are interested, you can review it even. So this is where I encourage practitioners and myself to improve programming by taking into consideration religious factors. This is just this link. It is open file, work in progress for review. And why? Because religious influences in gender-based violence are intersecting across different levels. Whether we look at the individual level, family level, community, societal, religion will be always intersecting either with culture or with politics or with power or with identity. So if we were to integrate religion as a factor, as we do with gender, age, disability, and other identity markers, I think we would be more successful in deconstructing the root causes and developing interventions addressing those causes. So I would like, really, advise myself and everyone who likes to learn to take religion as intersecting with multiple other factors and remind myself that it never comes in isolation. And I also would like to invite you to read my policy briefing that I developed during my postdoctoral fellowship, which is drawing on the book and all the work that I've done. This is, in a nutshell, everything there in 4 pages. It's just compressed version. So to respond to your question, as a way forward, I see that we need to integrate faith factors in our programs from design stage to implementation and monitoring. This means integrating religious factors into gender analysis, situational assessments, all different assessments that we do. It would be important to integrate this religious component, not as standalone, but mainstream it throughout different tools that we are using. And we need to engage and be able to work with the religious and secular dynamics that in order to facilitate this inclusive and holistic responses and partnerships that can transform behaviors and attitudes. So religious and secular dynamics, I think they are in constant interaction, and they are just evolving over time every day. We just need to be attentive to changes. And as I spoke at the beginning, religious literacy is essential to contextualize interventions. So for example, when working with perpetrators who are religious, with religious literacy, we could be able to mitigate risks and build resilience by respecting people's local people's individual worldview. So with specifics to specific recommendation, with reference to specific recommendations for GBV, gender-based violence or violence against women and girls, and mental health and psychosocial support practitioners, it would be important to consider how survivors use religion as a coping mechanism. So the strengths and capacities and aspirations and faith-based resources are not overlooked but built upon to support survivors to heal and perpetrators to transform. So that's in brief. I think I will end here and open question and answers.
Okay, Lisa and Sandra, thank you very much for your responses to those questions, and definitely showing that you're definitely doing that boundary crossing work, promoting it, promoting the importance of understanding that religion does need to be taken into account by policymakers, practitioners, professionals, and therefore that is a great strength in the book that you have produced. So now I'm going to open up for question and answers. So if people want to start thinking about those things, then just to kick off, I'll just throw something in. When I read the book, I was very struck, obviously, that you are practitioners and you do engage with these people face to face and listening to those stories. And I was very interested to hear just briefly about how you manage those encounters yourself, because obviously some of the stories there are really very painful when it's on the negative side, but show great strength and healing and the way in which religion can help people, survivors, overcome this. So if either of you want to just respond to that.
Yeah, sure. Important question. When we do this research, self-care is essential. We wouldn't be able to do this without self-care practices. It is an extremely difficult area to explore from experience, I know, but it is worth doing because, well, at that time, we didn't have some evidence. We only do this research when there is no evidence available. And based on we started our work, I think we did find the gaps. That's why we do this research. And there are different ways of caring for ourselves, obviously. Probably everyone has different coping mechanisms. It might be, running, it might be praying, it might be eating chocolates, or just talking to people in confidential manners with those that we trust to relieve ourselves from the stories. To be honest, I will never be the same person. I have heard so many stories and I have somehow processed them, and now I'm just a stronger person probably, but many stories I carry with myself. And this is what drives me to continue the journey and the work that I'm doing. Maybe I will let Lisa share her practices. Yeah, I'm sure she has amazing things. Lisa, that's a hard worker. Yeah.
Yeah, the chocolate one is a big one, definitely. But more seriously, I think what's been very positive for me to see over the years that I've been doing this kind of research, the conversation around mental health and your own processing and coping with this kind of research has really, it's evolved, and it's, just I think like the taboos around mental health is lifted within the researching space. But I think with practitioners as well, there's much more of an open conversation about the importance of also looking after yourself. I feel like when I started doing this, it was like it was often this kind of attitude of, well, suck it up. You didn't experience it, and the least you can do is be strong in the process. This might have been my own voices talking to myself. Whereas I think, also in conferences, in literature, there's much more of a discussion of how do you take care of yourself in this. Because I think we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. If people trust you with their stories, you must be a trustworthy and whole vessel to hold that. So I think as I see how these practices and conversations about it have evolved, I think I've also become better at it. I think in the start I was like, suck it up, eat more chocolate, work. Whereas now, debriefing with colleagues, engaging, getting counseling, because with certain issues and after certain trips have really become part of that process. Yes, I'll stop now.
Just one thing to add. I think by seeing the difference that we are making, and I feel like sometimes I see there's some little difference that I can observe after all different engagements, hard work, then I relieve the pain of the stories I heard. The more I can make a difference, the more relieved I feel. And yeah, I feel like this book also was part of the healing process to publish it out so people can know about it. The more I share, the lighter I feel, and I feel I fulfill my duty to people who trust me with their stories. And plus, at the university level, there is a requirement, at least in my university, the University of Birmingham, people researching such sensitive topics are entitled to clinical supervision at some point, at least for some period, if they need it. Yeah.
Thank you. There is a question here, and the question is, are there any areas that are under-researched, potential topics for future research within the areas that you work in?
Yeah, there are many, so we may take this interchangeably. I will start and I can end after Lisa when it comes to my mind. But the first topic is definitely spiritual experience, the religious experience of people. We found in our book, I think this is our joint finding, that we don't have sufficient evidence on how religious experiences of people. So, you know, these metaphysical experiences, the dreams or feelings, the daydreams even, all different metaphysical experiences of people, how they shape people's responses and vulnerability to violence or resilience. That's for sure one. And then if I reflect, there are so many contexts that are under-researched. Well, this is very contextual, and there are many new problems emerging as, unfortunately, there are more conflicts, new specific circumstances that require to be researched. Yeah, as the world is evolving, the technology, the artificial intelligence stuff, and everything is changing, perhaps the landscape. Let me reflect further, and Lisa, obviously.
Thank you, Sandra. Maybe two things. So I think definitely in our book, we also speak about this gap around spiritual experiences, religious experiences. If we're looking specifically around religion and violence against women and girls, I think there's a big gap around perpetrators, around research with men who are perpetrating violence and the role that religion plays in that perpetration and their justification, but also, you know, if they're in the process of them realizing the harms of what they do, if that is part of an intervention. So I think there's a massive gap around working with perpetrators. This is not only true of religion and violence against women and girls. We don't have that much research around perpetration and perpetrators for different reasons that we'll not go into now. I think a second thing is we have massive gaps with specific religions. So our evidence base around religion, violence against women and girls is super Christian, super Muslim, but not even as, you know, as much Muslim as it's Christian. It's very Christian. But we have massive gaps with other religions, and even bigger gaps with religions that don't have central sacred texts, and, you know, non-Abrahamic religions as well. So, you know, if anyone asks me, you know, where to go, you know, what to do, I'd say, you know, do whatever topic you want to do, just don't do it with Christianity or an Islamic setting, which, I mean, I'm obviously exaggerating, but we have so weak understanding of how these things play out in other religions. So those are two key ones that stand out for me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So more questions coming in fast and thick here now. So from Chris Kirkland, regarding the prophetic tradition of religious texts and how religious scholars, preachers convey the message of the respective religion, if this is more influence over the body of the texts themselves, basically, such as example for Islam transforming from a more progressive pro-science religion than Christianity in the Middle Ages, then how can we prevent religions from changing into something that would violate the basic rights and freedoms, especially of women and minorities? So this to do with prophetic tradition, the religious text, how religious scholars are conveying the message of their respective religions, and the whole thing about transforming from a more progressive pro-science religion, for example.
So maybe, Sandra, you take more time to really read that question, because I might now be So Chris, flag it to me if I'm not kind of answering what you're asking. But I think we need to realize, where are interventions? And if we look at faith-based intervention focused on violence against women and girls, very often, mostly, and I've evaluated many different ones, it engages with religious actors, religious leaders around reinterpreting sacred texts in ways that are more, conducive to gender equality and nonviolence. That's very often a key component of it. The flip side of this fact of working with key authoritative religious leaders around new ways of reinterpreting or interpreting sacred texts is that counter arguments can be made as well. And I think we see that globally, not just in the global south, playing out in various ways, how more conservative, exclusive religious voices are interpreting sacred texts. So just as we can call for more progressive interpretations, the flip side can also happen. And there's not a way of controlling that, I do not think. But Sandra, you have now had more time. And Chris, if I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry.
Thanks,
Maybe
great.
Sandra will then.
Yeah, this is interesting way. It's a good question. It's a reverse order. Yeah, I like that, because this is what is happening now in the world. Often religions are being essentialized and fundamental, more essentialist interpretations are appearing as religion carries power, and people realize, well, many people in power realize that they can manipulate religion to gain power. So in order to prevent this regression, first of all, we shouldn't shy away from engaging with religion and not take anybody claim that this is the religion, this is what it is, that's the interpretation. Because religion doesn't belong to anybody. It's obviously, people will say this belongs to me, but this is a personal understanding and belief, experience of religion. So if the governments in the increasingly secularized world will just go away from engaging with religion, there is a risk that some groups will like to hijack it and manipulate it to their own ends. So the government, even if secular, should still engage with in the religious debate and help religious communities to use it to their benefit for social development and progress. And any harmful interpretations should be countered on time, and more new narratives and new frameworks should be developed on time to prevent it, to absorb the negative and regressive, and how I think you have referred to more conservative interpretations. This is all, a continuous fluid process, and I appreciate your question. I hope I answered it in some way.
Thank you. So moving on, Emrys has asked, what NGO and other organisations would you both say stand out in managing the complex relationships between gender-based violence and religion?
Emrys, so now you're putting us on the spot.
Oh,
Sandra, do you want to go first? I don't know.
So what NGO and other organizations would stand out in managing the complex relationships between gender-based violence and religion? There are many organizations. I don't know if we can promote any of them, but we will draw on some examples, perhaps from our own experiences that we referred in the book. Well, there are commendable efforts of a number of faith-based international organizations who have developed transformative approaches to work to address violence against women by drawing on religion, by using faith-sensitive approaches. So if we refer to the example in the book, this is for sure Channels of Hope methodology by World Vision and Islamic Relief in Muslim settings. But also there are many others by Tear Fund, by Christian Aid, if I remember correctly. And those methodologies are drawing, based, as I said, on faith beliefs to help people transform their mindsets by drawing on what they believe in very short terms, in a way that helps people to address gender inequality, in a way that can help people reflect on the scriptural stories and refer back to the original, well, authentic or original interpretations, however people call earlier interpretations of some religious scriptures. And there are, well, some other organizations who do that, like SASA, if I remember correctly, SASA Faith, they have a methodology developed for that too. Lisa?
So I guess what I'll say, maybe, because I've worked with many different organizations and their faith-based methodologies or interventions, I think maybe rather than just naming specific organizations, I think it's important to emphasize that we have a number of faith-based NGOs that have developed methodologies, like set programs, like as Sandra mentioned, Channels of Hope of World Vision and Islamic Relief, but we have Transforming Masculinities from Tearfund, for example, as well. You know, Tracare, Raising Voices. Raising Voices is my second point. So we have our faith-based NGOs, but we also have organizations that work on violence against women and girls, develop good violence against women and girl programming, and then kind of develop an adaptation to focus on religion and religious communities as they see in their implementation of their original one that is needed. So if you're from the violence against women and girls space, you know that the SASA methodology of Raising Voices is, you know, evidence has shown its impact, and they developed the SASA Faith based on that's more focused on religion and religious communities. So, but then the final instance, I think it's also important to realize that we have small little faith communities that work in this space as well, like a church with a pastor that's passionate about this issue, that's just working in his community in his own ways. So it's not always these formalized methodologies, although I think the work done by these big organizations really, you know, the pastor in his small community can draw on this because it's almost all of it is public access. But I think it's important that we also look at the small ones, at the grassroots ones, at the faith community, you know, organic processes. But maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. So a question now from Dr. Isla Gol. So Isla's question is, to what the speakers think about the ongoing demonstrations in Iran and how this is related to the agency of women and perceptions in the West.
Sandra, I'm actually going to ask you to respond to this because I feel you're more informed.
Just my mic didn't work. Yeah, I'm here. I would like to extend this question to different settings, not just to Iran, because this question, I believe, concerns religious attire. Am I correct, Dr. Ayla? So if we extend it to religious attire question and we look at different broader settings, because I'm not in the position to discuss what's happening in Iran, but overall, in different countries, whether in Europe or Africa or Asia or any continent in the world, we see that there is more like state control over women's dress codes. Whether I reflect on Islamic context or Muslim minority context in Europe, where they are prevented from wearing hijabs, or whether these are Muslim majority countries where women are encouraged to wear a religious attire. I don't know. Regardless of the context, there is a problem because women should be having free agency to wear whatever they want. So the only thing I can say here is that we often may disregard the wishes of women, and women are the best place to choose what they want to wear and be free to embody it, yeah, without any kind of violence or risks of violence. I don't know if I answered your question. You may not be satisfied, but maybe Dr. Ayla would like to come in. Oh, Lisa, yeah. Okay.
Maybe just one thing that I want to add to that is we often see, you know, and a lot has been written on this, but how religion is co-opted for political ends. So a religious cause is almost added after the fact to justify certain behaviors or to call for certain behaviors. And I think in different ways, in different parts of the world, religious women and their attire and or behavior, because this is also often about their behavior, has been used as the kind of the poster child for an issue, for a political agenda, where it's, you know, the religion is the front person almost, the religious cause, or, you know, religious women and their attire. And I think it's important when we reflect on this to try and make that separation or kind of challenge that co-option. I don't know if that's a word in English, but this is a longer conversation, so thank you.
So we're quickly running out of time, 30 seconds each on this one. So this is from Dr. Victoria Desfield, and she says, I'm interested to know, are there geographic areas or particular communities that either of you would like to engage with in future research?
I love this question. Dream questions, yeah.
30 seconds.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to research what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Palestine. If I had a chance, I would go to Rohingya. I did applying for different projects, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, but there are so many new emerging issues that we just need new evidence and, well, new understanding, I guess. Yeah, although we can also deduct many findings from the previous studies, and on the other hand, maybe we don't need to research everything. We can't, but I would like to do more community-based research and more co-production methodologies. If I ever go into like detailed research again on violence against women, I would prefer to do it in co-production and enable women to learn a lot from this. Although I always try to make sure that our focus group discussions, interviews are mutually beneficial, and survivors usually appreciate to talk to a stranger about the experience. It might be a healing experience for whatever reasons, where they know that they will be not judged. We do it in sensitive ways. There are many contexts I would love to do more if I could. Yeah. Lisa.
Lisa?
So for me, the big one is I would just want to work in, I don't care where in the world, but just to work in different faith communities. So in Buddhist communities, more work in Hindu communities, Baha'i, but also really smaller African indigenous religions, that we just try and collect evidence from the bigger picture. I mean, there are many topics and things as well, but I think my biggest priority would be, we need to be doing research with different faith groups. It can't just be Christian and Islamic settings all the time. So that would be my dream. What a lovely question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are now virtually out of time. And so first of all, I would like to say a very big thank you both to Lisa and Sandra for discussing your book and your research with us, and the very valuable insights you've given both from an academic and also practitioner perspective. Very rich discussion indeed. And also thank you very much for the people that have joined us and for the excellent questions that we've had from you. So I will now close the panel session, and I wish you all a very good night or morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. And once again, thank you, Lisa and Sandra. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pauline. Yeah, for hosting it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.